The wind in Blackwood Creek did not just blow. It scoured. It carried the grit of 3 territories, a fine, biting dust that found its way through the tightest window sashes and settled deep in the lungs. For Anna Moore. The wind was just one more thing to endure, like the ache in her lower back or the raw, red skin of her knuckles. She stood behind the boarding house, scrubbing a heavy canvas sheet against the washboard. The water in the tub was gray and lukewarm, the lye soap stinging the cracks in her hands. It was late afternoon in the summer of 1885, and the sun beat down on the back of her neck with the weight of a hammer. Anna paused to wipe her forehead with her forearm, pushing back a stray lock of damp hair. From her vantage point in the alley, she could see the main thoroughfare of the town. It was a scar of mud and wagon ruts cutting through the sagebrush. Blackwood Creek was not a place where people came to live. It was a place where people ended up when they had nowhere else to go. The wooden sidewalks were warped and half buried in the earth, and the buildings leaned against the prevailing gusts as if tired of standing upright. She heard the crash of glass from the front parlor of the boarding house. Anna flinched, her stomach twisting. She knew that sound. It meant her father, Elias, was awake. Elias Moore had been a man of promise once, or so he claimed during his lucid moments. He had come west for silver, then for land, and finally just to run away from memories Anna was too young to understand. Now, he was a man who lived at the bottom of a bottle, gambling away money they did not have and promising Anna that their luck was about to turn. Mrs. Higgins, the owner of the boarding house, stepped onto the back porch. She was a stern woman, built like a grain sack, with eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. "Anna, Mrs. Higgins said, her voice flat. "You best come inside. Your father has knocked over the lamp table." Anna dried her hands on her apron, the rough fabric scratching her skin. "I will clean it up, Mrs. Higgins. I am sorry. Cleaning it up will not pay for the oil or the glass," the landlady said, crossing her arms. "And it will not pay the 6 weeks of back rent you two owe me." "I have the laundry money coming tomorrow," Anna said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Mrs. Miller promised $2 against a debt of 40. Mrs. Higgins scoffed. She looked at Anna, her expression softening just a fraction, shifting from anger to a harsh kind of pity. "You are 20 years old, Anna. You are not unlovely, though you are too thin. You cannot keep scrubbing other people's filth to feed a man who drinks it away. I have no other trade," Anna said, looking down at her boots. The leather was split at the toe. "There is the gilded lily." "Mrs. Higgins said." Anna's head snapped up. The Gilded Lily was the saloon at the far end of town. The women who worked there wore silk and painted their faces, and they died young and hard. "I will not work there." "Then you will be on the street come Monday," Mrs. Higgins said, "unless you find a different solution." She let the threat hang in the dusty air before turning back inside. Anna stood frozen, the noise of the town washing over her, the bawling of cattle in the holding pens, the shout of a drover, the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer. She felt the precariousness of her life like a physical weight. One misstep, one more bad week, and the abyss would swallow her. She went back to the washboard, scrubbing until her arms trembled, trying to wash away the fear. It was near sunset when the atmosphere on the street changed. The usual chaotic noise of Blackwood Creek dampened, a hush spreading from the livery stable up toward the general store. It was the kind of silence that fell when a storm broke over the ridge, or when a wolf walked into a sheep pen. Anna was hanging the wet sheets on the line when she saw him. A lone rider moved down the center of the street. He sat tall in the saddle of a massive bay gelding that looked as mean and hard-bitten as the country itself. The horse tossed its head, champing at the bit, but the rider's hand was steady, controlling the animal with barely a twitch of the reins. It was Cole Maddox. The town called him the Untouchable. Anna had seen him only a handful of times in the 2 years she had lived here, and each time, the sight of him sent a strange shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. He was a terrifying figure, even in the blistering heat of July. He was covered from boot to chin. He wore a long canvas duster stained with trail dust, buttoned high. Beneath it, a dark shirt was fastened all the way to his throat. A black bandana was tied tight around his neck, and a wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, leaving only a strong, grim jaw visible. His hands were encased in thick leather gloves, the kind men used for barbed wire, and he did not take them off. People stepped back as he passed. A mother on the boardwalk yanked her child roughly by the arm, pulling the boy behind her skirts. Two men arguing outside the hardware store fell silent, lowering their eyes to their boots until the big horse had clinked past. They said he was cursed. That was the favorite rumor among the washerwomen. They whispered that he had a disease that made his flesh rot off the bone, or that he had been marked by the devil himself. Others said he was an outlaw hiding his identity, or that he was burned so badly in a fire that looking at him would strike a woman blind. He never stopped at the saloon. He never played cards. He never visited the bathhouse or the barber. He rode in, bought his supplies, flour, coffee, ammunition, nails, and loaded them in silence. He spoke only what was necessary, his voice a low, rough rasp that sounded like gravel grinding together. Anna watched him dismount in front of the general store. He moved with a stiff, predatory grace. When a young clerk hurried out to help him with a sack of grain, the boy stumbled and nearly brushed against Cole's arm. Cole flinched. It was a violent, sharp movement, like a whip crack. He stepped back so fast he nearly tripped over his own spurs, putting 5 feet of distance between himself and the boy. The clerk froze, terrified. Cole stood rigid, his chest heaving beneath the heavy layers of clothing, his gloved hands clenched into fists at his sides. He did not speak. He just waited until the boy backed away. Then he grabbed the sack himself and slung it over his shoulder. He is afraid, Anna thought, the realization striking her with sudden clarity. He is not just solitary. He is terrified of being touched. She watched him until he disappeared inside the store. The mystery of him was a dark spot in the bright, dusty town. He was a man who lived entirely within the fortress of his own clothing, a ghost haunting the edges of their lives. That evening, the boarding house kitchen was stifling. Anna was peeling potatoes for the stew, the knife dull in her hand. Mrs. Higgins sat at the table, counting coins into a tin box. Mr. Maddox is looking for a wife. Mrs. Higgins said suddenly. The knife slipped, grazing Anna's thumb. She hissed, bringing the digit to her mouth. Who told you that? He told the storekeep. Who told the postmaster? Who told me? Mrs. Higgins said, not looking up. He needs someone to keep that ranch of his. It is 20 miles out, in the breaks. He has cattle, and he is trying to prove up on the claim. He cannot run the herd and the house both. Anna stared at her. You cannot be serious. The man is strange. People say he is mad. People say a lot of things. Mrs. Higgins said, they say he pays for everything in gold dust and clean bills. They say he has never raised a hand to anyone in this town, which is more than I can say for the sheriff. He is the untouchable, Anna whispered. He is a man with property. Mrs. Higgins countered, slamming the lid of the tin box shut. And you are a woman with a drunken father and an eviction notice. Anna looked out the window. The sun had set, leaving the sky a bruised purple. She thought of her father, passed out upstairs. She thought of the gilded lily, the smell of stale beer and desperation. She thought of winter coming, the wind finding the holes in her boots. Does he want a wife? Anna asked quietly. Or a servant? He wants a bargain. Mrs. Higgins said he made it clear. He is not looking for a sweetheart. He wants a woman who can work hard, cook a meal, and mind her own business. He offers a roof, food, and protection. Protection. The word held a seduction Anna had not expected. To be safe, to not worry about the rent, to not jump every time a door slammed. But the rumors? They said he had been hanged once and cut down before he died. They said he was branded like a steer. They said he had bad blood, the kind that turned a man violent when the moon was full. He is here tonight, Mrs. Higgins said. He took a room, the first time in 5 years. He is meeting with Mr. Henderson about a bull. I told him I might know a girl who is steady and not prone to flights of fancy. Anna felt the blood drain from her face. You told him about me? He is in the parlor now. Mrs. Higgins said, you can go in and speak to him, or you can go upstairs and pack your trunk. It is your choice, Anna, but choose wisely. The parlor was dim, lit only by the coal oil lamp on the mantel. The air smelled of beeswax and old dust. Cole Maddox stood by the window, looking out at the dark street. He still wore his coat, though the room was warm. His hat was in his hand, revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at the collar, streaked prematurely with gray. He turned as Anna entered. He was taller than he looked from the street. He filled the space, his shoulders broad and set in a line of constant tension. His face, now that she saw it close, was a landscape of harsh angles, high cheekbones, a nose that had been broken at least once, and a mouth that looked as if it had forgotten how to smile. A jagged white scar ran from his jawline down into the collar of his shirt, disappearing beneath the fabric. But it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, the color of wet slate, and they watched her with a guarded intensity that made her breath catch. Miss Moore, he said. His voice was a low rumble, rough like stones rolling in a riverbed. Mr. Maddox, she replied, clasping her hands in front of her apron to hide their shaking. He did not step forward. He stayed by the window, keeping the width of the room between them. He did not offer his hand. Mrs. Higgins says you are a worker. He said that you are not afraid of hardship. I have known plenty of it, Anna said. He nodded once, a sharp jerk of his chin. I have a place, 400 acres in the valley below the Needle Rocks. I have a herd of 50 head, horses, and a cabin. It is a hard life. The winters are cruel, and the summers are worse. It is lonely. He paused, his gaze drifting to her hands, red and chapped from the laundry. I need a woman to keep the house, he continued, his tone devoid of any softness. To cook, to mend, to keep the fire. I cannot be in the saddle and at the stove at the same time. And what do you offer in return? Anna asked, surprising herself with her boldness. He looked her in the eye. Security. You will never be hungry. You will have a warm bed. No one will bother you. I can promise you that. No man will ever darken your door unless I am dead. It was a powerful promise in a land where women were often prey, but there was a wall in his words, a boundary she could sense. And what else? She asked. A marriage is usually more than chores and food. Cole's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek. I am not a normal man. Miss Moore, I value my privacy. If you agree to this, you must agree to take me as I am. I keep to myself. I do not like to be questioned. And he hesitated, looking down at his gloved hands. I do not like to be touched. Anna stared at him. The rumors swirled in her head. Why would a man marry if he could not be touched? You mean, at all? She asked, her face heating. I mean that I require my own space, he said sharply. I will treat you with respect. I will never raise a hand to you in anger, but I will not be handled. If you are looking for romance, or a man to whisper pretty things, you best walk out that door. He looked almost ready to bolt. He seemed cornered, a wild animal forcing itself to stand still. But then his gaze shifted past her, through the open door to the hallway where her father was stumbling toward the stairs, coughing a wet, rattling cough. Anna saw Cole's expression change. The hardness in his eyes fractured for a second. He looked at Elias, then back at Anna's thin shoulders, her patched dress, the exhaustion etched under her eyes. There was no pity in his look, but there was recognition. He knew what it was to be trapped. I can pay your father's debts, Cole said quietly, and I can give him enough to get to a doctor in Denver, if he wants to go. But you come with me. That is the trade. Anna felt tears prick her eyes. It was a transaction. He was buying a housekeeper, and she was selling her life for her father's safety. But looking at him, this giant, scarred, terrified man standing in his heavy coat in the summer heat, she felt something other than fear. She felt a strange, magnetic pull. He was broken. She was broken. Perhaps two broken things could make something whole. "I will do it," she whispered. Cole exhaled, a sound that might have been relief. He nodded, stepping back as if to ensure he didn't accidentally brush against her. "We will go to the preacher tomorrow," he said. "We ride out immediately after." The wedding was a bleak affair. They stood in the small wooden church at noon the next day. The air inside was stifling, smelling of old hymnals and dry pine. Anna wore her Sunday best, a gray wool dress that had been turned twice and mended at the cuffs. She had scrubbed her face and pinned her hair up, but she felt pale and small beside Cole. He had not changed. He still wore the duster, the gloves, the high collar. He towered over the preacher, a small, nervous man named Reverend Thomas. "Do you, Cole Maddox, take this woman?" The Reverend droned. "I do," Cole said. His voice was steady, but he stared straight ahead at the wooden cross on the wall, refusing to look at Anna. When the time came for the ring, Cole fumbled in his pocket. He produced a plain gold band, heavy and old-fashioned. He held it between his gloved thumb and forefinger. "Take off your glove." "Son," the Reverend whispered, "you cannot ring a bride with leather on your hand." Cole froze. The silence in the church stretched, tight as a bowstring. He looked at the Reverend, then at Anna. His eyes were wide, panicked. For a moment, she thought he would turn and walk out, slowly, painfully. Cole reached for the cuff of his right glove. He pulled it off, revealing a hand that was large and square, the skin rough. But it was the back of the hand that drew Anna's eye. There were scars there, white and shiny, crisscrossing the knuckles and running up the wrist, vanishing into his sleeve. He moved quickly, anxious to be done. He took Anna's hand. His skin was incredibly hot, dry and feverish against her cool fingers. He slid the ring onto her finger, his touch light, barely skimming her skin. The moment the metal was in place, he snatched his hand back and shoved it deep into his coat pocket, leaving the glove on the pew. "I pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend said, sounding relieved. There was no kiss. Cole simply nodded to the preacher, placed a $10 gold piece on the altar, and turned to Anna. "We are burning daylight," he said. They walked out onto the porch. A group of men were loitering by the steps, chewing tobacco. They stopped talking as the couple emerged. "Look at that," one man muttered. "Loud enough to be heard? The beauty and the beast. Reckon she'll find out why he never takes his clothes off soon enough," another snickered. Cole stiffened. His hand went to the Colt revolver on his hip, the leather creaking. The men went silent instantly, their grins vanishing. Cole stared them down, his eyes cold fire, until they shuffled their feet and looked away. "Ignore them," he said to Anna, his voice tight. He led her to the livery stable where his bay horse waited, alongside a smaller, sturdy roan mare he had purchased for her. Her trunk was already strapped to a pack mule. He helped her mount, his hands gripping her waist for a fraction of a second to lift her. Even through the layers of her dress, she felt the strength in him, and the tremors. He was shaking. They rode out of Blackwood Creek without looking back. The town faded into the dust behind them, the buildings shrinking until they were nothing but toys scattered on the prairie. The trail led west, toward the jagged line of the mountains. The land opened up, vast and terrifyingly empty. The sky was a dome of relentless blue, the sun hammering down on the sagebrush. The wind kicked up, whistling through the rocks. Anna rode a few paces behind Cole. He sat straight, his gaze fixed on the horizon, a solitary figure in a coat of armor. She looked at the gold ring on her finger. It felt heavy. She was a married woman now. She had a home. She had safety. But as the silence stretched out over the miles, broken only by the steady rhythm of hooves and the lonely cry of a hawk, Anna felt a profound isolation settle over her. She was alone in the wilderness with a man who could not bear to be touched, a husband who was a stranger, riding toward a life she could not imagine. She shivered in the heat, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders, and followed him into the empty land. The sun was bleeding out against the jagged teeth of the western mountains when they finally reached the homestead. It was a landscape that commanded silence. The valley lay tucked beneath the shadow of the needle rocks, a harsh amphitheater of red stone and scrub oak that seemed to hold the cold long after the sun had touched it. Anna sat atop her mare, her back aching from the 20 miles of rough trail, and looked at her new life. The cabin sat on a rise above a meandering, half-frozen creek. It was not the grand ranch house of a wealthy cattle baron. It was a fortress of solitude, built from hand-hewn logs that had been darkened by weather and time. A lean-to barn stood to the east, and a sturdy corral held a few horses that lifted their heads to watch the arrival. There was no garden, no flower box, no sign of softness anywhere. It was a place built for survival, stripped of anything unnecessary. Cole reined in his big bay gelding and swung down from the saddle. His boots hit the hard-packed earth with a heavy thud. He did not look at her immediately. He scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing as he checked the fence line, the ridge, the dark clusters of pine. He was always watching. Anna realized. Home, he said. The word sounded strange coming from him, devoid of warmth. It was a statement of geography, not sentiment. He walked over to her horse and reached up. For a second, she hesitated, looking down at his gloved hands. Then she slid off, his grip firm on her waist to steady her descent. As soon as her boots touched the ground, he released her and stepped back, retreating into his personal space as if he had been burned. "Go inside," he said, gathering the reins of both horses. "There is kindling by the stove. I will see to the stock." Anna walked up the porch steps, the wood creaking under her weight. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped into the gloom. The interior smelled of pine pitch, wood smoke, and cold ash. As her eyes adjusted, she saw that the cabin was just one large room. It was scrupulously, almost unnervingly, tidy. A large cast-iron stove dominated the center, black and imposing. A rough table with 2 chairs sat near the window. Along the far wall, a shelf held a few tin plates and cups, stacked with military precision. There was no clutter, no stray papers, no unwashed clothes, no forgotten tools. It felt less like a home and more like a campsite that had been fortified. At the back of the room, a heavy canvas curtain hung from a rod, partitioning off a sleeping area. Anna walked toward it, her heart thumping a slow, nervous rhythm against her ribs. She pulled the curtain back. A narrow bed sat there, covered in a heavy buffalo robe and a patchwork quilt that looked surprisingly domestic, perhaps bought in town years ago. At the foot of the bed sat a large, iron-bound trunk. A heavy brass padlock secured the latch. It was the only thing in the room that looked truly personal, a locked box of secrets in a house of bare wood. She let the curtain fall. This was it. This was where she would live. This was where she would be a wife. She moved to the stove, her hands shaking slightly as she opened the iron door. She found the kindling Cole had promised, stacked in a neat pyramid. She struck a match, the sulfur flare brief and bright, and watched the dry wood catch. The fire crackled, a small sound of life in the quiet room. When Cole finally entered, the sky outside was fully dark. He brought a gust of cold air with him, carrying the scent of horses and hay. He had unbuttoned his heavy duster, but he still wore it, along with his hat and gloves. "I brought your trunk in," he said, nodding toward the door where her belongings sat. "Thank you," Anna said. He moved to the table and began to unbuckle his gun belt. He coiled it carefully, placing the heavy Colt revolver within easy reach. Then he took a blackened coffee pot from the shelf. "I will make supper," Anna said quickly, stepping forward. That is part of the bargain." Cole paused, looking at her. The lantern light threw the scar on his neck into sharp relief. He seemed to weigh her offer, or perhaps he was simply remembering that he was no longer alone. "There is salt pork in the cellar box," he said, "and beans in the jar." He stepped away from the stove, ceding the territory to her. Supper was a quiet affair. The only sounds were the scrape of spoons on tin plates and the wind beginning to rise outside. whistling through the chinking of the logs. Cole ate with efficiency, his eyes fixed on his plate. He did not make conversation. He did not ask her if she liked the cabin. He simply consumed the fuel he needed to work the next day. When the meal was done, Anna washed the plates in a basin of warmed water. She felt his eyes on her back, heavy and unreadable. When she turned around, drying her hands on her apron, he was standing by the curtain. "You take the bed," he said. Anna blinked. "Where will you sleep?" Cole gestured to the wooden armchair near the stove. It looked hard and unforgiving. "I have slept on rocks softer than that bed. The chair will do fine. But you are my husband," Anna said, the words feeling clumsy. He flinched, his jaw tightening. "I am aware of the arrangement, Anna, but I am not a man who changes his habits easily. I sleep better when I can hear the door. Take the bed." He turned his back on her, dismissing the subject. Anna watched him settle into the chair, stretching his long legs out toward the stove. He pulled his hat down over his eyes and crossed his arms over his chest. He did not take off his boots. He did not take off his coat. Anna retreated behind the curtain. She undressed in the dark, shivering in the cold air, and pulled on her flannel nightgown. She climbed into the narrow bed. The sheets were cold, and they smelled of him, a mix of sagebrush, oil, and something metallic. She lay on her back, staring up at the rough-hewn beams of the ceiling, barely visible in the gloom. The silence of the cabin was heavy, pressing down on her. She could hear Cole's breathing on the other side of the curtain, slow, steady, controlled. She was safe. The wind was outside. The debt collectors were miles away, and her father was no longer her burden. But as the tears pricked her eyes, hot and stinging, she felt a loneliness deeper than any she had known in the boarding house. She was married to a shadow, a man who would rather sleep in a wooden chair with his boots on than lie beside her. The next morning began before dawn. Anna woke to the sound of the stove door clanging shut. By the time she dressed and came out from behind the curtain, the coffee was boiling and Cole was gone. She found him in the barn, pitching hay to the horses. The air was sharp enough to cut glass, frost coating the fence rails in delicate white crystals. Cole did not stop working when she entered. "Grab the grain bucket," he said, nodding toward a sack in the corner. "The sorrel mare gets 2 scoops, the bay gets 3, and so the rhythm was set." The days that followed were a blur of exhausting labor. The romance of the West, if it had ever existed for Anna, died in the first hour of chopping wood. The homestead was a demanding beast that needed constant feeding. She learned to haul water from the creek, breaking the thin layer of ice with a stone before dipping the heavy buckets. The water sloshed onto her skirts, freezing stiff in the wind, chafing her legs as she walked up the hill. She learned to mend fence, holding the wire taut while Cole hammered the staples, her fingers numb inside her thin mittens. Cole was a hard taskmaster, but not a cruel one. He did not yell. He simply expected the work to be done. He worked harder than she did, driving himself from first light until long after dark, as if he were trying to outrun something. Yet, there were moments, small fractures in his armor. On the 3rd day, Anna was splitting kindling behind the cabin. She was swinging the hatchet with all her might, but the wood was knotted and stubborn. She struck it wrong, the handle jarring her arm all the way to the shoulder. She cried out, dropping the tool and clutching her wrist. Cole was there in an instant. He had been shoeing a horse nearby, but he moved with a speed that belied his size. "Let me see," he said, his voice rough. He took her hand. He did not take off his glove, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as he manipulated her wrist, checking for a break. "It is just bruised," he said. "You are holding it wrong. You are fighting the wood." He picked up the hatchet. "Stand here." He positioned her in front of the chopping block. He stepped behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, though he was careful not to press against her. He reached around, his arms encircling her but hovering an inch away from contact, guiding her hands on the handle. "Slide your hand down as you swing," he murmured, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. "Let the weight of the iron do the work." "Do not force it." Anna swallowed hard. her pulse hammering in her throat. For a moment, she was surrounded by him, the smell of leather and sweat, the sheer size of him blocking out the wind. "Try it," he said, stepping back quickly. She swung, sliding her hand as he had shown. The hatchet bit clean and deep, splitting the wood with a satisfying crack. "Better," Cole said. He stood watching her for a second longer, his eyes dark and unreadable, before turning abruptly and heading back to the corral. That night, after she had fallen asleep in the chair by the stove while mending his shirt, she woke to find a heavy wool blanket draped over her shoulders. Cole was across the room, staring out the dark window, his back to her. He never acknowledged doing it, but the blanket smelled of him. Winter tightened its grip on the valley. The wind grew sharper, howling down from the peaks with a voice that sounded like human screaming. The temperature dropped until the water in the basin froze solid overnight. The chair became impossible. It happened 2 weeks in. Cole came in from the barn, shaking snow from his duster. His face was gray with cold, his lips pale. He looked at the chair, then at the fire that was fighting a losing battle against the drafty logs. "I cannot sleep in the chair tonight," he said. His voice was defiant, as if he expected her to argue. "It is your bed." "Cole," Anna said softly, "I have never asked you to stay out of it." He nodded once, stiffly. He waited until she had gone behind the curtain and extinguished the lamp before he came in. Anna lay on the far edge of the mattress, pressing herself against the cold wall to give him room. She heard the rustle of clothing, the thud of boots. But when he got into the bed, she realized he had barely undressed. He wore his trousers. He wore his flannel shirt. He even kept his socks on. He lay down on the very edge of the mattress, his back to her, his body rigid as a plank of wood. "Good night," he said into the darkness. "Good night," she whispered. She lay awake for hours. The heat coming off him was intoxicating. It warmed the small space under the quilt, creating a cocoon of shared existence. She wanted to reach out. She wanted to touch his shoulder, to ask him why he was so afraid, to tell him that she was not going to hurt him. But the distance between them, just 6 inches of mattress, felt like a canyon. The nights fell into a pattern of tortured proximity. They shared the bed, but they did not share themselves. Cole slept like a soldier in a trench, fully dressed, ready to spring up at a moment's notice. He never turned toward her. If she moved in her sleep and her foot brushed his calf, he would flinch and pull away, retreating further to the edge until he was nearly falling off. Anna's initial gratitude for the home and the safety began to curdle into something else. Curiosity, frustration, a deep, aching loneliness that was worse than being alone, because the remedy was lying right there, breathing in the dark beside her. Why, she wondered, staring at the back of his head. What are you hiding? The windstorm hit in late November. It was a Chinook, warm and violent, melting the snow and turning the ground to mud, screaming through the eaves with a ferocity that shook the cabin to its foundations. The noise was deafening. The roof groaned, and the heavy shutters banged against the logs. Anna could not sleep. The chaos outside made her feel small and fragile. She turned over. Cole was awake. She could tell by the tension in his shoulders. "Cole?" she whispered. He did not answer. The wind shrieked, a sound like a woman wailing. Anna shuddered. Without thinking, compelled by a need for human comfort in the face of the storm's fury, she reached out. Her hand found his hand where it rested on the quilt. His reaction was instantaneous. He jerked as if she had touched him with a hot iron. He gasped, a sharp intake of breath, but he did not pull away completely. Instead, he caught her hand in his. His grip was strong, his palm rough and calloused. For a heartbeat, just one fragile second, he held her hand tight. Anna's heart leaped. Then, gently but with absolute firmness, he lifted her hand and placed it back on her side of the bed. "Go to sleep, Anna," he said. His voice was strained, tight with something that sounded like pain. But, sleep. He rolled further away, pulling the quilt up to his chin. Anna lay in the dark, her hand burning where he had touched it. The rejection stung more than the wind. It was not that he didn't want her. She could have handled indifference. It was that he was terrified of her touch. He acted as if her skin was poison. She turned her face to the wall, biting her lip to keep from crying, while the wind battered the house and her husband lay beside her, a stone statue wrapped in flannel. The harshness of the land seemed to conspire with the silence in the cabin. A sudden hailstorm in the afternoon shredded the sheets Anna had hung on the line, leaving her to patch the tatters with numb fingers while Cole watched, his face grim. A wolf began to prowl the perimeter of the ranch, its howl echoing off the canyon walls at night. Too close, too hungry. Cole spent his evenings cleaning his rifle, the smell of gun oil sharp in the room. Then came the calf. It was born during a sleet storm, a late-season straggler dropped by a heifer that had wandered into the brush. Cole found them near the creek. He carried the calf back to the barn in his arms, the heifer following anxiously. Anna brought blankets and warm milk. When she entered the stall, she stopped. Cole was kneeling in the straw, the calf draped across his lap. The creature was half frozen, blue-lipped and shivering violently. Cole had opened his heavy coat and pulled the calf against his chest, tucking it inside the warmth of his layers. He was rubbing the animal's flank with vigorous, rhythmic strokes, murmuring to it. "Come on now," he whispered. "You are too tough to die today. Come on, little one, breathe." His voice was a low, soothing rumble, full of a tenderness Anna had never heard. His hands, those gloved hands that flinched from human contact, were gentle and sure on the calf's wet fur. He poured his own warmth into the dying thing, willing it to live. Anna watched from the shadows, a lump in her throat. He was capable of this. He was capable of nurturing, of protecting, of physical closeness. Just not with her. The calf let out a bleat and kicked. Cole chuckled, a dry, rusty sound. "There you go." He looked up and saw Anna. The tenderness vanished instantly. The mask slammed back down. "It will live," he said, his voice flat. "Go back to the house. It is cold out here." Anna began to watch him with the eyes of a detective. She noticed the rituals, the obsessive modesty. When he washed in the morning, he used a basin on the porch, even in the freezing cold. If she came to the door, he would snatch up his towel and cover his chest before she could see anything but his face. He never took off his undershirt, not ever. When she washed their clothes in the big tub on Mondays, his long johns and shirts went in, but he always seemed to be wearing a set. He must have changed in the barn or in the woods, stripping down in the biting cold rather than risk her seeing him for a moment in the cabin. He buttons his collar to the top. She thought, even when he is sweating, even when he is choking on the heat of the stove. One Tuesday, Cole was riding the north fence line. Anna was sorting the laundry pile. She picked up one of his work shirts, a heavy gray flannel. As she prepared to scrub the cuffs, she stopped. The inside of the left cuff was stained dark. It wasn't dirt, and it wasn't grease. It was a reddish-brown stain that had been scrubbed at but never fully removed. She brought it closer to the light. It looked like old blood. She checked the other cuff. The same faint, dark smears on the inside of the fabric, right where it would rub against his wrists. She touched the cloth, her finger tracing the stain. She imagined his wrists beneath the fabric. Were they open wounds? Were they scars that wept? Why would a man bleed into his cuffs? She remembered the rumors in town, branded, lynched. A strange sensation washed over her. It wasn't disgust. It was a fierce, frustrated compassion. He was carrying something on his body, a map of pain that he refused to let anyone read. He was bleeding into his clothes to keep his secret. She scrubbed the shirt gently, careful not to tear the fabric, feeling closer to him in that moment than she ever had when he was in the room. The crisis came a week later. Cole had been gone all day chasing a stray stallion that had broken out of the lower pasture. He returned long after dark, looking like a man made of soot and exhaustion. His face was streaked with mud, his eyes rimmed with red fatigue. He ate his supper in silence, his hands shaking slightly as he held the spoon. He went to bed without a word, falling onto the mattress heavily For once, he didn't lie on the very edge. He collapsed into the center of the bed, overpowered by sleep. Anna lay beside him. The cabin was cold. The fire died down to embers. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a furnace against the chill. She fell asleep to the rhythm of his breathing. Sometime in the deep hours of the night, she drifted toward him. It was instinct, the body seeking warmth. She rolled over and pressed herself against his back, her arm draped over his waist, her hand resting flat against his chest, right over his heart. He did not wake immediately. Anna floated in a haze of sleep. She felt the heavy beat of his heart under her palm. She felt the rise and fall of his ribs. He was solid. He was warm. Then she felt him change. He stiffened. The easy rhythm of his breathing stopped. Anna woke up fully. She realized what she had done. She was clinging to him, her body molded to the curve of his back, through the thin flannel of his shirt and her nightgown. They were touching everywhere. She held her breath, waiting for him to shove her away, but he didn't move. For a long, suspended moment. Cole lay absolutely still. Then, slowly, incredibly, the tension left his frame. His shoulders dropped. He exhaled a long, shuddering breath. He leaned back, just a fraction of an inch, pressing himself into her embrace. Anna's heart hammered. She tightened her arm around him. A silent question. He was trembling. She could feel it against her skin, a fine, high-frequency vibration running through him. It wasn't cold. It was desire and terror, warring in the dark. She moved her hand slightly, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. Cole let out a sound, a whimper, low in his throat, like a wounded animal. It was a sound of such naked need that it broke her heart. She thought he was going to turn. She thought, finally, the wall was coming down. Then his breathing hitched. It grew shallow, rapid, panicked. The trembling turned into shaking. "No," he gasped. He tore himself away from her. He scrambled out of the bed, tangling in the quilt, stumbling onto the cold floor. "Cole!" Anna sat up, reaching for him. "Don't!" he choked out. He grabbed his coat from the chair. He didn't bother with his boots. He unlocked the door with fumbling hands and burst out onto the porch, slamming the door behind him. Anna sat alone in the dark, the cold air from the open door swirling around her. She heard his heavy footsteps on the porch boards, back and forth, like a caged tiger. She pulled the quilt up to her chin, curling into a ball where his warmth still lingered on the sheets. The rejection was a physical blow, an ache in her chest that made it hard to breathe. "What is it?" she whispered to the empty room. "What is so terrible that you cannot let me love you?" Outside, the pacing stopped. She heard a heavy thud, as if he had slumped against the wall of the cabin. She imagined him out there in the freezing night, looking at the stars, shivering in his armor of secrets. Anna lay awake until dawn, listening to the silence, wondering if the man she married would ever come back inside, or if the winter had finally claimed him. The winter of 1886 came down from the mountains like a white curtain, sealing the valley in a silence so profound it felt heavy on the ears. For 3 weeks, the snow fell without ceasing, piling in drifts against the north wall of the cabin until the window was half buried in a drift of blue-white powder. The world outside ceased to exist. Blackwood Creek, the boarding house, the debts, and the rumors were all erased by the storm. There was only the cabin, the stove, and the two of them moving in the dim, amber light of the kerosene lamp. The isolation should have been terrifying. Instead, it became a strange, suspended grace. Anna found herself learning the language of Cole Maddox, which was not spoken in words but in the tilt of a head, the set of a shoulder, or the way he placed a cup on the table, without the exhausting labor of the fence line or the cattle to tear them apart. They were forced into a proximity that was intimate by necessity. One morning, Anna burned the biscuits. The stove was running too hot, fueled by the resin-heavy pine Cole had chopped, and she had been distracted watching the frost patterns on the glass. When she pulled the pan out, the bottoms were charred black. She set them on the table with a sigh of frustration. "I have ruined them," she said, scraping a knife against the burnt crust. "They are hard as river stones. I am sorry. Cole." Cole looked up from the harness he was mending. He reached out, took a biscuit from her hand, and bit into it without hesitation. The crunch was audible in the quiet room. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and then took another bite. "It eats fine," he said. "It tastes like charcoal," Anna countered, though a flush of pleasure warmed her neck. "I have eaten saddle leather that tasted worse," Cole said. He looked at her, and the corner of his mouth twitched, a microscopic movement that, on his stoic face, was the equivalent of a hearty laugh. "Besides, I like a little crunch. Keeps the teeth sharp." It was a small thing, a joke shared over a ruined breakfast, but it felt like a door cracking open. Later that day, Cole was moving feed sacks in the lean-to attached to the barn. They were 100-pound bags of grain, heavy and awkward. Anna watched from the doorway as he hoisted them. He did not grunt or strain visibly. He simply dipped his knees and lifted, his body moving with a fluid, powerful economy. She found herself staring at the muscles in his back moving beneath his flannel shirt. He was strong, undeniably so. The rumors of him being maimed or crippled seemed impossible when she watched him work. He was a machine of muscle and bone, built to endure. When he finished, he came to the doorway, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove. He saw her watching him. He did not look away immediately. For a long moment, they stood in the cold air, their breath mingling in white clouds between them. "You are staring, Anna," he said, his voice low. "I was wondering how you do that without breaking your back." She lied. "It is just leverage," he said, "and knowing something is heavy before you pick it up." He walked past her into the cabin, brushing close enough that she smelled the scent of him. Hay, cold air, and the sharp tang of sweat. It was not an unpleasant smell. It was the smell of life in a dead season. That evening, he caught his knuckles on the edge of the iron stove door, tearing the skin. Blood welled up, dark and bright. "Sit," Anna commanded, surprising herself. Cole looked at his hand, then at her. He sat. She brought the basin and a strip of clean linen. She washed the cut, her fingers moving gently over his scarred, rough skin. He held his hand perfectly still, but she could feel the tension in his forearm, the muscles tight as wire cables. He was fighting the urge to pull away. She did not hurry. She dried the skin and wrapped the linen, tying a neat knot. When she finished, she didn't release his hand immediately. She let her fingers rest on his palm, feeling the calluses, the map of his labor. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. He pulled his hand back slowly, not jerking it this time, but sliding it from her grip like water slipping through fingers. The truce of winter was fragile. However, the danger of the land was always waiting. 2 days later, Anna went to the creek to break the ice for water. The path was slick, a sheet of glass hidden under a dusting of fresh snow. She was carrying 2 heavy buckets, her balance precarious. Her boot heel caught on a root. Her feet went out from under her. She fell backward, the buckets flying, her head snapping back toward the frozen earth. She didn't hit the ground. An arm hooked around her waist, slamming the air out of her lungs, and yanked her upright with bruising force. Cole had been behind her, silent as a ghost. He hauled her against his chest, his grip so tight it hurt. Anna gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked up. Cole's face was pale, his eyes wide and dark. He wasn't looking at her, he was looking at the rock her head had narrowly missed. His breathing was ragged. "You foolish woman!" he shouted. The sound was shocking in the quiet valley. He shook her once, hard. "You could have cracked your skull open. Do you not look where you put your feet?" Anna flinched, stung by the anger. "I slipped. Cole, I didn't. You have to look," he roared, his voice cracking. "There is no doctor here, Anna. There is no help. If you break yourself, there is nothing I can do." He was trembling. The anger, she realized with a jolt, was not anger at all. It was terror. He was terrified of her getting hurt. He was terrified of being unable to save her. She reached up and touched his chest, right over his heart, which was beating as fast as a trapped bird's. "I am all right," she said softly. "Cole, I am all right. I am here." He stared down at her, his chest heaving. Slowly, the rage drained out of his face, leaving him looking young and vulnerable. He loosened his grip on her waist, but didn't let go. "I cannot—" He started, then stopped. He swallowed hard. "Be careful. Anna, please." He released her abruptly and picked up the buckets himself, marching down to the creek to smash the ice with violent, unnecessary force. The tension in the cabin changed after that. It was no longer just the awkwardness of strangers. It was the charged, electric atmosphere of two people who wanted each other but didn't know how to cross the divide. Anna began to watch him with open hunger. She watched the way his throat moved when he drank coffee. She watched the way his hands cared for the horses. She lay awake at night in the bed, listening to his breathing, aching to roll over and bridge the gap. Cole was aware of it. She could tell. He moved around her carefully, like a man walking through a room full of gunpowder with a lit match. The blizzard struck in mid-January. It was a true whiteout, a storm that buried the world. The wind screamed like a banshee, rattling the door on its hinges. The temperature inside the cabin plummeted. They moved the table close to the stove. They sat in the circle of heat, the rest of the room swallowed by shadows. Cole was cleaning his rifle. The rhythmic snick-snick of the cloth, the only sound inside. Anna was mending a tear in her skirt. Her hands were cold, her fingers stiff. She fumbled with the needle, dropping it. Cole set the rifle down. He looked at her hands, red and raw from the cold water and the dry air. Without a word, he reached out. He took her left hand in his right. He didn't wear gloves inside anymore, not in the evenings. His skin was warm, dry, and rough. He rubbed her knuckles with his thumb. A slow, hypnotic movement. Anna stopped breathing. She stared at their joined hands. It was the first time he had touched her voluntarily, without a utilitarian purpose. Since the wedding ring, his thumb brushed over a scab on her knuckle. He traced the line of her wrist bone. His head was bowed, his eyes focused intently on her skin, as if he were memorizing the texture of it. "Your hands are cold," he murmured. "You keep the house warm." She whispered back. He looked up. His eyes were dark pools, stripped of their usual guard. There was a hunger in them that mirrored her own, a raw, starving look that made her stomach flip. The wind howled outside, a chaotic counterpoint to the stillness between them. Cole leaned forward. He moved slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. He didn't close his eyes. He watched her until the very last second. His mouth brushed hers. It was tentative at first, a question. His lips were chapped, tasting of coffee. Anna let out a soft sigh and leaned into him. That small movement broke the dam. Cole groaned low in his throat. His hand came up to cup the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. He kissed her hard, a desperate, crushing pressure. It wasn't the kiss of a refined suitor. It was the kiss of a man who had been alone in the desert for a lifetime and had finally found water. Anna responded instantly. She dropped her sewing. Her hands went to his shoulders, gripping the thick wool of his shirt. She opened her mouth to him, and the kiss deepened, becoming wet and frantic. She could feel the heat radiating off him. He was burning up. He pulled her chair closer until their knees bumped. He kissed her jaw, her throat, the sensitive spot behind her ear. Anna's head fell back. She was dizzy with it, the sudden, overwhelming sensory overload after months of deprivation. She wanted to feel him, skin to skin. Her hands moved down his chest. She found the placket of his shirt. Her fingers, trembling, fumbled with the top button. Cole froze. It was instantaneous. His body went rigid against hers. He pulled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His hand clamped over her wrist, stopping her fingers. "No," he whispered. The word was a plea, not a command. His eyes were wide, panicked, the hunger warring with the fear. "Cole, please," Anna breathed, her lips swollen, It is only me." He shook his head, a jerky, frantic motion. "Not yet, Anna, not yet." He didn't let go of her wrist. He held it away from his chest, protecting his secret, but he didn't push her away entirely. He leaned his forehead against hers, his eyes closing. "I cannot," he said, his voice breaking. "Then kiss me again," she demanded softly. "If I cannot see you, then let me feel you." He obeyed. He kissed her again, fiercely, burying his face in her neck, his hands clutching her waist, pulling her as close as the layers of clothing would allow. They stayed like that for an hour, tangled together by the stove while the storm raged, a knot of heat and frustration. The weeks that followed were a torment of inching progress. The barrier of the shirt remained absolute. Cole would not take it off. He would not unbutton it. He slept in it, worked in it, lived in it. But the physical distance in the cabin evaporated. He began to touch her, a hand on the small of her back when she was cooking, a brush of his fingers against her cheek when he came in from the cold. In the evenings, after the chores were done, the cabin became a space of heated, silent negotiation. They would stand in the shadows of the corner, Cole pressing her against the rough logs, his body heavy against hers. He would kiss her until her knees went weak, his hands roaming over the fabric of her dress, learning the shape of her. He was a man starving, eating crumbs. Anna felt the hard lines of his muscles through his clothes. She felt the scars on his back through the flannel, ridges of raised flesh that she traced with her fingertips, making him shudder. But every time she tried to slip her hand inside, every time she tried to cross the boundary of the cloth, he stopped her. Sometimes he would catch her hand and kiss the palm, apologizing without words. Sometimes he would simply pull away, his face closing down, and walk out into the snow to cool off. The rejection began to eat at her. It wasn't just frustration anymore. It was doubt, deep, corrosive doubt. She stood by the creek on a Tuesday, scrubbing the heavy sheets in the icy water. The sun was out, blindingly bright on the snow, but the air was bitter. "Why?" she asked the silence. "Is it me? Is he repulsed by the sight of me? Am I too thin, too plain? Or was it him?" The rumors from town crept back into her mind, diseased, maimed. Does he have a rot? Does he have a growth? Is he hiding something so terrible that he thinks I will scream if I see it? She thought of the way he flinched, the terror in his eyes. Or does he regret it? Does he regret marrying a laundress with a drunk for a father? Is this his way of keeping me a servant and not a wife? She scrubbed the sheet so hard she tore a small hole in the fabric. She stared at it, tears freezing on her lashes. She was married to a man she loved, a man who seemed to love her, yet she had never seen his skin below the neck. It was a madness. The thaw arrived in March. It was a messy, muddy affair. The snow melted into slush, the creek swelled to a brown torrent, and the road to town became a bog. But they were out of flour and coffee. They had to go. The ride to Blackwood Creek was silent. Cole rode with his usual vigilance, his eyes scanning the ridges. Anna rode beside him, feeling the knot of anxiety in her stomach tighten as the town came into view. She hated this place. She hated the memories of the boarding house, the mud, the judging eyes. They tied the horses at the hitching rail in front of the general store. The town looked the same, gray, battered, and hostile. "You get the dry goods," Cole said, handing her a small pouch of gold dust. "I will go to the livery for grain. Meet me here in 20 minutes. He didn't touch her. He pulled his hat low and strode away, his spurs jingling. Anna entered the store. The bell above the door jingled. The warmth of the potbelly stove hit her, along with the smell of pickles and tobacco. 2 women were standing by the fabric counter, Mrs. Gable, the banker's wife, and Mrs. Miller, the woman Anna used to wash for. They stopped talking when Anna entered. Their eyes raked over her, taking in her worn coat, her wind-chapped face, her mud-spattered boots. "Well, Mrs. Gable said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "if it isn't the bride. We thought you might have frozen to death up there in the rocks." "We are quite well, thank you," Anna said stiffly, moving to the counter to order the flour. The clerk, a young man with acne scars, took her order without meeting her eyes. Mrs. Miller leaned in toward Mrs. Gable, not lowering her voice nearly enough. She looks thin, doesn't she? Mrs. Miller whispered. Works her like a mule. I hear Mrs. Gable replied. And for what? Everyone knows why he lives alone. Anna's hands tightened on the counter. She stared at the jar of peppermint sticks. Why? Mrs. Miller asked. Mrs. Gable let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Because he isn't a whole man. Dear, my husband heard it from a drover who knew him in Kansas. Said he was ruined below the belt, burnt off or cut off. I don't know, but he is no use to a woman in the dark. If you catch my meaning. The words hit Anna like a physical slap. Heat flooded her face, a mix of humiliation and a sudden, furious defensiveness. She turned around. Mrs. Gable, Anna said, her voice shaking but loud. My husband is twice the man yours is, and he pays his bills, which is more than I can say for Mrs. Miller. The store went silent. Mrs. Miller gasped. Anna grabbed her sack of flour and the coffee tin from the clerk, leaving the change on the counter, and marched out the door. Her heart was pounding so hard she felt sick. Ruined. The word echoed in her mind. Is that it? Is that why he stops me? She stepped out onto the boardwalk and nearly collided with a wall of a man. It wasn't Cole. It was a rancher named Briggs. Anna knew him by reputation, a mean-spirited man who ran cattle on the East Range and held a grudge against anyone who didn't bow to him. He was big, smelling of stale whiskey and unwashed wool. Well now, Briggs sneered, blocking her path. Look at this, the little washerwoman playing rancher's wife. Let me pass. Mr. Briggs, Anna said, clutching her flour sack. Where is your freak of a husband? Briggs asked, looking around. Hiding? Or did he send you to do his business because he is too scared to show his face? He is not afraid of you, Anna said. Briggs laughed. A wet, ugly sound. He should be. I heard about his cattle. Maveri's stock. Stolen. Likely. Just like everything else he has. He is a branded man. Little lady. Marked. You know what they do to branded stock that wanders? They cut it. Anna stepped back, fear cold in her stomach. Briggs took a step forward, looming over her. You should have stayed in the laundry, girl. At least there you knew what you were handling. You are sleeping with a monster. Suddenly, Briggs jerked backward. A gloved hand had clamped onto his shoulder. Cole was there. He hadn't made a sound approaching. He simply appeared. A dark, avenging angel. Cole didn't push him. He just squeezed. Briggs grimaced, trying to shrug him off, but Cole's grip was iron. Step away from my wife, Cole said. His voice was very quiet. It was the quiet of a rattlesnake before the strike. Briggs stumbled back, rubbing his shoulder. He looked at Cole, his eyes full of hate. Maddox. He spat. I was just telling your woman here that she bought a pig in a poke. Does she know? Does she know what you are? Cole's face went rigid. All the color drained from his skin, leaving the scar on his jaw standing out like a white cord. He did not draw his gun. He did not strike Briggs. He simply stood between Anna and the other man, his body a shield. Go home, Briggs, Cole said, before I forget that I am trying to be a civilized man. Civilized, Briggs laughed, backing toward his horse. You are meat, Maddox, walking meat. You think those gloves hide it? We all know. You're marked. And one day, I'm going to come up there and peel you like an apple to show everyone. Cole didn't move. He stood statue still in the mud, taking the insults, absorbing the venom. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, trembling slightly. Briggs mounted his horse and spat into the dirt near Cole's boot. Keep your fences tight, untouchable. Winter is over. He rode off, his men following, laughing as they went. Cole stood there for a long moment, staring at the ground. The town watched from the windows. The shame radiating off him was palpable. It wasn't the shame of a coward. It was the shame of a man who believes the insults are true. Cole? Anna whispered. He turned to her. His eyes were dead. Get on your horse, Anna. We are leaving. The ride back to the homestead was a nightmare. The silence was no longer companionable. It was suffocating. Anna's mind was spinning. Ruined. Marked. Monster. And Cole's reaction, he hadn't denied it. He had just stood there and taken it. They arrived at the cabin as the sun was setting. Cole dismounted and started to unsaddle the horses with jerky, angry movements. Anna couldn't take it anymore. "What did he mean?" she demanded, standing by the corral gate. Cole didn't look at her. "Nothing. He is a drunk and a bully. He called you marked." "Cole, he said everyone knows what you are. What are you?" Cole swung the heavy saddle onto the fence rail. It hit wood with a crash. "Go inside." "Anna, no!" she shouted. She had never shouted at him before. "I will not go inside. I am your wife. I sleep in your bed. I wash your clothes. And you treat me like a child you have to protect from the dark." Cole turned on her. His face was twisted with an emotion she couldn't name. Rage, grief, panic. "I am protecting you," he shouted back. "I am protecting you from me. From you." Anna stepped forward, the mud sucking at her boots. "What is it? Are you sick? Are you dying? Are you—" She choked on the words. "Are you a man at all?" Cole flinched as if she had struck him. He stared at her, his chest heaving. The silence stretched, agonizing and long. "You want to know?" he whispered harshly. "You want to know if I am a man?" "Yes," she said, tears hot in her eyes. "I want to know who I married." Cole looked at her, and for a second, she thought he would do it. She thought he would rip the shirt open and show her the truth, whatever horror it was. But the fear won. He shook his head slowly. The fire went out of him, leaving only ash. "The past is ugly." "Anna," he said, his voice flat and dead. "It is ugly and it is over. I told you when we married, do not ask questions. I give you a home. I give you safety. That is the bargain." He turned away from her and walked into the barn. "It isn't enough," she screamed after him. "It isn't enough anymore. He didn't stop." Anna stood in the fading light, the wind picking up again, drying the tears on her face. She felt a door slam shut in her heart. He didn't trust her. After the winter, after the blizzard, after the nights of holding each other, he didn't trust her. That night was the coldest they had ever shared. Cole came in late. He undressed in the dark, down to his armor of flannel and trousers. He got into the bed. He turned his back to her immediately. He lay on the very edge, as far away as he could get without falling off. Anna lay on her side, facing away from him. Her back was to his back. There was a foot of cold space between them. Outside, the coyotes began to yip and howl at the moon. It was a lonely, desolate sound. Anna stared into the darkness. She felt the ring on her finger. It felt like a shackle. She had married the Untouchable, and she realized now that the name wasn't just about his body. It was his soul. He had built a wall around it so high and so thick that she couldn't climb it, no matter how much she loved him. She closed her eyes and listened to the coyotes cry, while the distance between her and her husband stretched out larger than the whole prairie. Spring arrived not with a gentle unfurling of flowers, but with the violence of a breaking fever. The snow that had buried the valley for months turned into a deluge of slush and mud, swelling the creek until it roared like a living thing, tearing at the banks and threatening the corrals. The world was wet, brown, and exhausting. For Anna, the mud became a second skin. She stopped trying to keep the hem of her dress clean. She hemmed it up higher, pulled on a pair of Cole's old boots that she stuffed with wool to make fit, and went to work. There was no time for the silence that had filled the winter. The season demanded everything they had. The fences had been bowed by the heavy drifts and needed restringing. The calves were dropping, slick and wet in the chilly mornings, needing to be branded and tallied. Cole took a contract to break a wild stallion for a man in the next valley. It was a massive, roan creature with a white eye and a temper like gunpowder. Anna watched from the fence rail as Cole worked the animal in the round pen. The mud flew in heavy clods as the horse bucked, twisting its body in impossible shapes. Cole sat deep in the saddle, his body loose and fluid, absorbing the violence. He did not whip the horse. He did not shout. He simply outlasted it, his face set in a grim mask of concentration. watching him. Anna felt a strange mix of fear and pride. He was masterful with creatures that were hurt and angry. He understood them in a way he did not understand people. She threw herself into the work alongside him. She learned to throw a rope, her arm aching until she could catch a fence post 3 times out of 5. She learned to check the cows for rot foot in the damp earth. She learned to ride the perimeter of their land alone, a rifle scabbard under her leg, scanning the horizon for wolves or strays. The physical exhaustion was a mercy. It kept her from thinking too much about the nights, about the man who lay 6 inches away from her in the dark, rigid and silent. It was late April when she found the ruins. She was riding the eastern fence line, checking for breaks where the antelope crossed. The land here was rugged, a series of shallow draws and sandstone ridges that hid their secrets well. She spotted a break in the wire and dismounted to fix it. While she wrestled the pliers, something caught her eye further down the draw. It looked like the skeletal remains of a structure, blackened and jutting from the earth like broken teeth. Curiosity pulled her away from the fence. She led her mare down the slope, the mud sucking at her boots. It was an old homestead, burned to the ground years ago. The main beams of the house had collapsed inward, leaving only charred stumps. Twisted pieces of iron, a bed frame, a stove door lay rusting in the weeds. The silence here was different. It was heavy, oppressive. Anna walked through the wreckage. She touched a blackened support post, the charcoal crumbling under her glove. Fire had taken this place, and it had taken it fast. She turned toward a large cottonwood tree that stood near what used to be the porch. The bark was thick and deeply grooved, but one branch, high up and thick as a man's thigh, bore a scar. It was a smooth, unnatural ring worn into the wood, where a rope had once bitten deep and held a heavy weight. A shiver ran down her spine, despite the afternoon sun. She looked down at the base of the tree. Half buried in the mud and dead grass was a piece of wood, likely a sign that had once hung over the door or the gate. She crouched and dug it out. It was charred on one end, but the carving was deep. She brushed away the dirt. M-A-D-D-O-X. The letters were faint, but legible. Anna dropped the wood as if it were a hot coal. She backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was his family. This was where he came from. She mounted her horse and rode back to the cabin, the image of the rope-scarred tree burning in her mind. Supper that night was stew, thick with potatoes and venison. The wind had picked up again, rattling the shutters. Cole was eating with his usual mechanical efficiency. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes etched deep by the sun and the wind. "I rode the east line today," Anna said quietly. Cole nodded, not looking up. "The wire is loose near the creek. I need to tighten it. I found the house. Cole!" His hand stopped halfway to his mouth. He set the spoon down slowly. The silence in the room became instant and absolute. He did not ask which house. He knew. "I found the sign," Anna continued, her voice trembling slightly. "It was your family's place, wasn't it?" Cole stared at the table. His jaw worked, a muscle jumping under the skin. "It was," he said. His voice was devoid of inflection. "What happened?" Anna asked. "The wood was charred." "It burned." "A fire," Cole said. "The law called it an accident. A stove overturned in the night. That is what they wrote on the paper." He looked up then, and Anna saw something in his eyes that terrified her. It was a cold, flat rage, ancient and unresolved. "You do not believe it was an accident," she whispered. Cole stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the floorboards. "It does not matter what I believe, Anna. It is ash and rust. Leave it be." He took his plate to the basin and walked out onto the porch, standing in the dark, staring toward the east. Anna watched his hands gripping the porch rail. They were shaking. The storms returned in May, violent electrical disturbances that lit up the valley like noon. The thunder shook the ground. With the storms came the nightmares. Anna woke to a sound that chilled her blood. It was a gurgling, choking gasp, the sound of a man fighting for air. She sat up. A flash of lightning illuminated the room. Cole was thrashing on the bed. His head was thrown back, his teeth bared in a rictus of terror. His hands were clawing at his own throat, scratching at the high collar of his shirt as if something were tightening around his windpipe. "No!" he gasped, the word strangled. "Don't! Please! Cole!" Anna shouted, grabbing his shoulders. "Cole! Wake up!" He didn't hear her. He was trapped in some hell she couldn't see. He arched his back, screaming a soundless scream. His hands ripped at his shirt. The fabric gave way. Buttons popped, pinging against the floorboards. Anna froze. In the flash of another lightning strike, she saw his chest. The shirt was torn open to the sternum. Beneath the flannel, the skin was a ruin. Twisted, raised ridges of scar tissue crisscrossed his collarbone and upper chest. They were not clean surgical scars. They were ugly, knotted marks, the kind left by burns or a whip that had cut to the bone. And lower, on the pec, there was something else, a dark, puckered shape that looked like a brand. The light died, plunging the room back into darkness. Cole woke with a violent jolt. He sat up, gasping, his hand flying to his torn shirt, clutching the fabric together with desperate force. He looked at Anna. He saw that she was awake, that she was staring at his chest. "Oh God," he whispered. He scrambled backward, falling off the bed on the far side. He didn't stand up. He crab-walked into the corner of the room, into the deepest shadow, curling in on himself. "Cole," Anna said, her voice shaking. "Let me help you. Stay back," he shouted. It was a raw, animal sound. "Don't look at me." He was weeping. "Great," heaving sobs that shook his massive frame. Anna sat on the bed, her heart breaking. She wanted to go to him, to wrap her arms around him, but she knew that right now, her touch would feel like another attack. She waited. After a long time, the sobbing quieted. Cole stood up in the dark. She heard him fumbling for his coat, buttoning it all the way to the chin. "I am sorry," he rasped. "I am sorry I woke you." He walked out the door and into the rain. The next morning, the shame radiated off him like heat from a stove. He would not meet her eyes. He moved around the cabin with his head down, his shoulders hunched. He looked like a man who expected to be struck. Anna found him in the barn, oiling a harness. She walked up to him and put a hand on his arm. He flinched but didn't pull away. "Cole," she said gently, "you do not have to hide from me." He looked at the harness, rubbing the oil in with obsessive care. "I am ruined." "Anna," he said softly, "you saw. It is meat. Just meat. It is survival," she said fiercely. "That is what I saw. I saw that you lived when the world tried to kill you." He looked at her then, his eyes full of a baffled sorrow. He didn't understand how she could look at him without revulsion. "You are a good woman, Anna," he said, "but you do not know the half of it." He refused to say more. He buttoned his coat tighter and went out to check the herd. The danger that had been lurking on the edges of their life finally stepped onto the porch a week later. It was Briggs again. He rode by with 4 men this time. They didn't come to the house, but they didn't pass by either. They stopped on the ridge that overlooked the pasture, sitting on their horses, watching. Anna was in the garden patch she had started near the house. She stood up, shielding her eyes against the sun. Cole came out of the barn. He had his rifle in his hand. He didn't raise it, but he held it across his body, ready. He stood by the porch, his body tense as a coiled spring. He watched the men on the ridge. They sat there for 10 minutes, just looking at the cattle, looking at the house, looking at Anna. Then, without a word, Briggs turned his horse and they rode away. It was not a visit. It was a survey. Cole lowered the rifle, but his muscles didn't relax. "They are coming back," Anna said, the realization cold in her stomach. "Eventually," Cole said, "Briggs is a man who covets. He wants this water, and he thinks I am weak because of who I was." "Who were you?" Anna asked. Cole turned to her. His face was hard. "I was no one, Anna, and if we are lucky, I will stay that way." The rain trapped them inside again 3 days later. It was a cold, miserable drizzle that turned the afternoon gray. Anna was tidying the cabin. She was sweeping under the bed when her broom hit something hard. It was a small brass key. She picked it up. She recognized it instantly. It was the key to the trunk at the foot of the bed. It must have fallen out of Cole's trousers the night of the nightmare, when he had fled in such a panic. She held the key in her palm. It felt heavy. She looked at the door. Cole was in the barn, shoeing the roan. He would be ours. Do not ask questions. He had said, do not pry. But Briggs was circling. Cole was screaming in the night, and the secrets in this house were suffocating her. She knelt by the trunk. Her hands were shaking. I have to know, she whispered. I have to know what I am fighting. She slid the key into the heavy padlock. It turned with a smooth, well-oiled click. She threw back the lid. The smell of old leather and dried herbs rose up. The trunk was neatly packed. On top lay a shirt. It was white linen, expensive once, but now stained a rusty, stiff brown. The entire front was stiff with old blood. There were holes in it, jagged tears that matched the scars she had seen on his chest. She lifted the shirt with trembling fingers. Beneath it lay a rolled-up piece of paper. She unrolled it. It was a wanted poster. Wanted dead or alive Luke, the kid Holloway for murder, horse theft, and train robbery. The sketch was blurry, but the eyes were unmistakable. It was a boy, maybe 15 years old, a boy with Cole's jaw and Cole's haunted eyes. Anna gasped. Luke Holloway. She had heard that name in stories. He was part of the Red Sash Gang, a brutal outfit that had terrorized the territory 20 years ago. She set the poster down, her heart racing. At the bottom of the trunk lay a strip of leather. It was crude, tanned badly. Burned into the leather was a symbol, a circle with a cross through it. It looked like a target. She picked it up, running her thumb over the brand. The door crashed open. Anna jumped, dropping the leather strip. Cole stood in the doorway. He was dripping wet, his hat pulled low. He looked at the open trunk. He looked at the wanted poster in her hand. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. Then, the blood rushed back in a torrent of red rage. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't hit her. He grabbed the lid of the trunk and slammed it shut with a violence that shook the floor. He turned on her, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. You promised, he roared. The sound was deafening in the small room. You gave me your word. I had to know, Anna shouted back, standing her ground though her knees were shaking. You scream in the night. Men threaten us. I found your family's house burned to ash. I cannot live with a ghost. Cole, I am not a ghost, he yelled. I am a man who asked for one thing. One thing. Anna, privacy. And you stole it. He grabbed the wanted poster from her hand and crumpled it, throwing it into the fire of the stove. Luke Holloway? Anna asked, her voice cutting through his rage. You were an outlaw? You were a murderer? I was a child, he screamed. The confession hung in the air, raw and bleeding. I was a child, he repeated, his voice breaking. They took me when I was 12. They made me ride. They made me watch. And when I tried to run... He stopped. His hand went to his chest, clutching the fabric of his shirt. You want the truth? He hissed, stepping closer to her. You want to know what is under this shirt? Yes, Anna cried. Yes, I want to know. If you knew, he said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. If you saw what they did to me, you would never touch me again. You would vomit. Anna, you would look at me like a monster. I am looking at you now, she yelled. And I see my husband. You see a lie, he shouted. He backed away from her, his breath coming in gasps. He looked around the room as if seeking an escape. I cannot be here, he said. I cannot let you look at me now that you know. Cole, stop. Anna stepped toward him. Don't, he warned, holding up a hand. Don't come near me. He turned and bolted out the door, into the storm. Anna ran to the porch. Cole, come back. He didn't turn. He ran to the barn. A moment later, she saw the glow of a lantern inside. She stood in the doorway, the rain lashing her face. The argument echoed in her ears. If you knew, you would never touch me again. She went back inside and sat by the stove. She was shaking uncontrollably. She looked at the locked trunk. She felt the marriage cracking. It wasn't the secrets that were breaking it. It was his belief that he was unlovable. He truly believed that the truth of his past made him a monster. The night passed in a blur of wind and rain. Anna didn't sleep. She sat in the chair, wrapped in a quilt, watching the door. He didn't come back. When dawn broke, the rain stopped. The sky was a bruised purple. Anna opened the door. On the porch, stacked neatly beside the frame, was a pile of fresh firewood. It was split perfectly, the dry wood protected from the damp. He had cut it in the night. He had brought it to the door so she would have heat when she woke up. Even in his rage, even in his shame, he had made sure she was warm. Anna stared at the wood, tears blurring her vision. He loved her. He loved her so much it terrified him. She made a decision. She dressed quickly, pulling on a riding skirt. She saddled the mare. She didn't go to the barn to say goodbye. She rode straight out the gate, heading for town. Blackwood Creek was waking up when she rode in. The mud was ankle deep. She didn't go to the general store. She tied her horse in front of the livery and walked to the back alley behind the saloon. Old man Grady was there, sitting on a crate, nursing a bottle of rot-gut whiskey. He was the town historian, the keeper of all the dirty secrets. Mr. Grady, Anna said. The old man squinted at her up. Mrs. Maddox, a bit early for a lady to be in the alley. I have $1 for you, Anna said, holding up a silver coin. If you tell me the truth. Grady's eyes fixed on the coin. Truth is a rare commodity. Ma'am, what do you want to know? Tell me about Luke Halloway. Grady flinched. He took a long pull from the bottle. That is a name I ain't heard in a long time, not since the lynching. Tell me, Anna commanded. Grady sighed. He was a kid, 12, maybe 13. The Red Sash gang hit his daddy's homestead, burned it down, killed the parents, took the boy, they say the leader, a devil named Silas, kept the boy like a pet, made him hold the horses while they robbed the trains. Anna felt sick, but she kept her face stone. And the brand? Grady nodded. Silas branded his men, like cattle, marked them so they couldn't run. The boy tried to run twice. Silas whipped him near to death the first time. The second time. Well, go on. The gang got cornered in a box canyon near here. The posse killed most of them. The boy surrendered. He came out with his hands up, crying, and the town didn't care. Grady said, spitting into the mud. They were angry. They had lost money and men. They saw an outlaw. They didn't see a kid. They strung him up. Anna's hand flew to her mouth. They hanged him? Tried to. Grady said, rope broke. Or maybe God intervened. He fell. But the mob, they weren't done. They dragged him, beat him, tore his clothes off and saw the brand. They said he was marked by the devil. Left him for dead in the sagebrush. But he didn't live, Grady added, shaking his head. That boy died out there. No, Anna whispered. He survived. Grady looked at her, his watery eyes widening. Maddox? Anna didn't answer. She dropped the $1 into his lap and walked away. She walked back to her horse, her legs feeling like lead. The horror of it washed over her. He wasn't a criminal. He was a victim, a child who had been stolen, tortured, branded, and then murdered by the very people who should have saved him. He was untouchable because they had made him that way. They had projected their own sin onto his skin. She mounted her horse. She thought of the scars on his chest, the twisted flesh where the whip had cut him, the brand that marked him as property, the rope scar on his neck, and she thought of him stacking wood on her porch in the rain. She didn't feel revulsion. She didn't feel fear. She felt a love so fierce it burned like fire. She felt a rage at the world that had hurt him, and a bottomless pity for the boy who had been forced to become a stone to survive. She turned the mare toward home. She was going to break down that door. She was going to tear down the wall he had built. He thought his scars made him a monster. She was going to show him they made him a miracle. The ride back from Blackwood Creek was the longest 20 miles of Anna's life. The mare was tired, stumbling in the mud, but Anna kept her moving, her eyes fixed on the distant notch in the mountains where the homestead lay hidden. She carried a secret now, heavy as a stone in her pocket. But unlike the secrets Cole carried, this one did not weigh her down with shame. It filled her with a fierce, burning purpose. She had left the ranch a confused, hurt girl running from a husband who shut her out. She was returning as a woman who finally understood the war she had been drafted into. When she rode through the gate, the sun was already dipping behind the peaks, casting long, bruised shadows across the valley. Cole was in the corral, throwing hay to the stock. He stopped when he saw her. He stood perfectly still, the pitchfork held like a weapon, watching her approach. His face was a mask of exhaustion and wary fear. He expected her to pack her trunk. He expected her to scream. He expected her to leave. Anna dismounted. She didn't run to him. She didn't cry. She simply tied the mare to the rail and walked over to where he stood. "I am back," she said. Cole gripped the handle of the pitchfork until his knuckles turned white. "I see that. I will start supper," Anna said. She walked past him, close enough that her skirt brushed his leg. She didn't flinch. She didn't look for the scars. She just went into the cabin, hung up her coat, and stoked the fire in the stove. For the next 3 days, the cabin was a place of quiet, suspended tension. It was not the cold silence of the winter, nor the angry silence of the argument. It was a waiting silence. Anna resumed her chores with a steady rhythm. She cooked, she swept, she mended the shirt he had torn in his nightmare. But everything she did was different. When she handed him his coffee in the morning, she didn't just set it on the table. She placed it near his hand, her fingers lingering on the tin cup until he took it. When she passed him in the narrow space between the table and the bed, she didn't suck in her breath to make herself small. She moved naturally, letting her shoulder brush his arm, a casual, claiming touch. She watched him, but not with the hungry curiosity of before. Her eyes were soft, heavy with knowledge. Cole moved like a man walking on thin ice. He watched her watching him. He was waiting for the blow to fall. He was waiting for the disgust. But every time he looked up, he found only a steady, patient warmth that confused him more than anger ever could. The evening came on the 4th day. The wind had died down, leaving the valley in a rare, breathless stillness. They had finished supper. The plates were washed and stacked. Cole was sitting by the stove, oiling his boots, the smell of grease and leather filling the room. Anna sat in the chair opposite him, a basket of mending in her lap. She set the needle down. "Cole," she said. He didn't look up. He kept rubbing the grease into the leather, small, circular motions. "Yeah, I went to see old man Grady in town." The motion of his hand stopped. The silence in the room instantly sharpened into a blade. Cole didn't move. He stared at the boot in his lap as if he had never seen it before. "I know." "Cole," she said softly. He slowly set the boot down on the floor. He sat up, his spine rigid, pressing back against the wooden chair. He looked at the wall, refusing to meet her gaze. "You know," he repeated. His voice was a dry rasp. "I know about Luke Halloway," she said. "I know about the Red Sash Gang. And I know what the town did to you." Cole closed his eyes. A shudder went through him, a visible ripple of pain that started in his shoulders and went down to his hands. He looked suddenly smaller, the massive strength of him collapsing inward under the weight of the exposure. "So now you know," he whispered. "You know you are married to trash. You know you are sharing a bed with a man who is owned by outlaws." "No," Anna said. Her voice was firm, cutting through his self-loathing. "I know I am married to a man who survived hell." Cole laughed, a harsh, cracking sound that held no humor. "Survived? Is that what you call it?" He stood up abruptly, knocking the chair back. He paced to the window, staring out into the dark. "I was 12 years old. Anna, 12. Do you know what a 12-year-old boy is? He is nothing. He is soft clay. And they took that clay and they burned it until it was hard and ugly." He turned to face her. His face was twisted with a fury she knew wasn't directed at her, but at the memory living in his skin. "You think it is noble?" he spat. "You think it is some story in a dime novel? The brave boy who endured? It wasn't brave. I was terrified. I cried for my mother every night for a year until Silas beat it out of me. I rode with them. Anna, I held the horses while they killed men. I ate the food they bought with stolen gold. I am part of it." "You were a child," Anna said, standing up. "You had no choice. There is always a choice," Cole shouted. The sound echoed off the log walls. "I could have died. I should have let them kill me the first day. But I was too scared to die. So I let them make me into this." He gestured violently to his own body, his hands clawing at his chest. "And then the town." He continued, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "Good, God-fearing people. They didn't see a boy. They saw a monster. They saw the brand and they decided I was the devil's own dog. And they were right." He looked at her, his eyes wild and wet. "Why are you still here?" he demanded. "You know the truth. You know I am soiled. Why haven't you packed your bag? Are you waiting for me to pay you off? Is that it?" The accusation hung in the air, ugly and desperate. He was trying to drive her away. He was trying to hurt her so she would leave before she could hurt him. Anna walked across the room. She didn't stop until she was 2 feet from him. "I am not going anywhere. Cole, I don't want your pity," he roared, backing away until he hit the wall. "I don't want you to look at me and feel sorry for the broken thing. It is not pity," Anna said, her voice rising to match his. "It is awe. Cole, do you not see?" She took another step, invading his space. "I wanted you before I knew," she said. "I wanted you when I thought you were just a quiet, strange man who was afraid of the cold. But now that I know what you carried, now that I know you walked out of a grave and built this life." She reached out and took his hand. He tried to pull it away, but she held on with a strength born of months of ranch work. "I love you, Cole Maddox. Not in spite of it, because of it. Because you are the strongest man I have ever known." The fight went out of him all at once. His knees seemed to give way, and he slid down the wall until he was crouching on the floor, his head in his hands. Anna knelt beside him. She didn't touch him yet. She waited. God, he wept. The sound was muffled by his hands. "I am so tired. Anna, I am so tired of hiding." "Then stop," she whispered. Tell me everything." And he did. It came out in pieces, jagged and bloody. He told her about the night the fire came, the smell of the kerosene, the sound of his mother screaming. He told her about Silas, the leader of the gang, a man who believed that pain was the only way to teach loyalty. He told her about the branding. "They tied me to a wagon wheel," he said, his voice devoid of emotion now, detached by trauma. "Silas said I tried to run, so he had to mark me, so everyone would know who I belonged to. He heated the iron in the campfire. It smelled like cooking meat," and a tear slipped down her cheeks, hot and silent. But she didn't look away. "And the lynching?" she asked gently. Cole shuddered. "The posse caught us in the canyon. I ran toward them. I threw my gun down. I thought they were saving me." He looked up at her, his eyes hollow. "They didn't save me. They put a rope around my neck. They pulled me up a cottonwood tree. I blacked out. The rope snapped. It was old. Dry rot. I fell. I woke up in the dirt, and they were standing over me. They stripped my shirt off to see if I was carrying gold. They saw the brand." He swallowed hard, his hand going to his throat. "One of them kicked me in the ribs. He said, 'Leave it for the coyotes. It ain't worth the bullet.' And they rode away." He slowly unbuttoned the top button of his shirt. He pulled the collar aside. There, circling his neck, was a faint, silvery line, a rope burn that had scarred over, a necklace of violence that he had worn for 20 years. "This is why I am untouchable, Anna," he whispered. "Because everyone who has ever touched my skin has tried to hurt me. Because I am marked. If I take this shirt off, all you will see is the sin." Anna looked at the scar. She looked at his face, ravaged by the memory. She reached out. She didn't hesitate this time. She placed both her hands on his face, cupping his jaw, forcing him to look at her. "You are wrong," she said fiercely. She leaned in and kissed his forehead, then his cheek, then, very gently, she kissed the scar on his neck. Cole gasped, his whole body stiffening. "These are not marks of sin," she whispered against his skin. "They are proof that you survived. They are proof that they couldn't kill you. You are not the mark. Cole, you are the man who lived through it." She pulled back to look him in the eye. "I want to see you," she said. Cole's eyes widened in panic. "No, Anna, I cannot. I want to see my husband," she said. "I am not the town. I am not the posse. I am Anna, and I am asking you, please." He stared at her, searching for any sign of disgust. He found only love. Slowly, his hands shaking so hard they could barely function. He reached for the buttons of his shirt. He undid the second one, then the third. He breathed in shallow, ragged gasps. He pulled the shirt tails out of his trousers. He shrugged the flannel off his shoulders. It fell to the floor. He was wearing a faded cotton undershirt beneath it. He reached for the hem to pull it up, but his hands froze. He couldn't do it. The terror was too deep. He dropped his hands, his head hanging in defeat. "I can't," he choked out. "I am sorry. I can't. It is all right," Anna said soothingly. "It is all right." She stood up. The lamp was burning low, casting long shadows across the room. "Look at me. Cole!" He looked up. Anna reached for the buttons of her own bodice. Her fingers were steady. She unbuttoned the gray wool dress. She pushed it off her shoulders and let it pool around her hips. She untied her petticoats. She stood before him in her chemise and drawers. She was not the idealized woman of a painting. She was thin from the hard winter. Her collarbones were sharp. Her arms were muscled from the laundry and the axe. She reached up and pulled the strap of her chemise down, revealing her right shoulder. There, pale against her skin, was a jagged, puckered scar. "I fell through a glass window when I was 6, she said softly. "My father was drunk. He pushed me. I bled so much they thought I would die." She traced the scar with her own hand. "I used to hide this. I thought no man would want a woman who was broken. I thought it made me ugly." She stepped closer to him, standing between his knees as he sat on the floor. "We are all marked. Cole, the world is hard. It writes on us." She took his hand, his large, calloused, trembling hand, and placed it on her bare shoulder, right over the scar. "Touch me," she whispered. Cole's fingers hovered on her skin. He felt the ridge of the old wound. He felt the heat of her blood beneath it. He looked at the scar, then up at her face. He realized what she was doing. She was stripping herself bare, exposing her own history, her own damage, to show him that he was safe. She was leveling the ground between them. A sound broke from his throat, half sob, half sigh. He began to stroke her scar with his thumb. His touch was reverent, impossibly gentle. "It does not make you ugly," he whispered. "No," she said, "and neither do yours." She leaned down and kissed him. This time, he didn't pull back. He reached up and pulled her down into his lap. His arms went around her, crushing her against him. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in the scent of her skin, her soap, her life. Anna held him. She felt the heavy beat of his heart against her chest. He was still wearing the undershirt, the last barrier of his shame, but the emotional wall was gone. He kissed her shoulder, his lips moving over her scar. He kissed her throat. His hands, usually so careful to avoid contact, began to explore the curve of her back, the sharpness of her spine, the softness of her waist. "Anna," he murmured against her skin. "Anna." They stayed there on the floor for a long time, holding onto each other like two survivors of a shipwreck who had finally found land. There was desire there. Yes, a sharp, rising heat that made Anna's breath catch, but it was grounded in something deeper. It was the desire of being known. When they finally moved to the bed, Cole didn't take off the undershirt. He wasn't ready, but he let Anna's hands roam over his back, feeling the ridges of the scars through the thin cotton. He let her press her body against his, skin to cloth to skin, no longer flinching, no longer afraid. The peace inside the cabin was a fragile bubble, and the world outside held a needle. 2 days later, the trouble arrived. It started with the cattle. Anna found 3 heifers dead near the creek. Their throats had been cut. It wasn't wolves. The cuts were clean, made by a sharp blade. It was a message. That evening, as the sun went down, Anna spotted them. She was bringing in the laundry when she saw the silhouettes on the ridge to the west. 5 riders. They were motionless, black shapes against the blood-red sky. She ran inside. Cole. He was cleaning his rifle. He looked up, saw the fear in her face, and stood up instantly. Where? The West Ridge. 5 of them. Cole moved to the window, staying back in the shadows. He peered out. Briggs. He said, and he has hired help. Those aren't cowhands. They are gunmen. Why are they waiting? Anna asked, her voice trembling. They are waiting for dark, Cole said grimly. They want to burn us out. It is the coward's way. He turned to her. His face was calm now. The panic of his exposure was gone, replaced by the cold, tactical focus of the man who had survived the Red Sash gang. Fill every bucket we have with water, he commanded. Put them by the stove. If they throw torches, we need to be ready. He began to move furniture. He pushed the heavy oak table against the door. He took the shutters and barred them with heavy iron bolts he had installed but never used. Anna worked beside him, her heart hammering. We have to send for the sheriff. Cole, we cannot fight 5 men alone. Cole stopped. He looked at her, and the bitterness in his eyes was old and deep. The sheriff? He said. Sheriff Miller drinks with Briggs every Saturday night. You think he is going to ride 20 miles to save the Untouchable? He is the law, Anna cried. The law, Cole said, checking the load in his Winchester, is for people like you. Anna, for people who are whole. For men like me. The law is just another gang with a different badge. If I bring the sheriff here, he will likely hold the rope for Briggs. He walked over to the window and peered through the crack in the shutter. We are on our own, he said. Night fell like a shroud. The moon was hidden behind heavy clouds. The wind picked up, whistling through the eaves, masking the sound of approaching hoofbeats. The cabin was dark. They had doused the lamp to avoid making targets of themselves. The only light came from the embers in the stove, casting a dull, red glow on the floor. Cole sat by the window, his rifle across his knees. Anna sat on the floor beside him, loading cartridges into a spare belt. The silence stretched out, tight as a drum skin. Anna looked at her husband. In the dim light, he looked like a statue carved from granite, but she knew now that the stone was just a shell. Cole, she whispered. He reached down and took her hand. His grip was firm. If they come, he said quietly, you go to the cellar. You take the pistol. If they get through the door, I am not leaving you, she said. Anna, no, she cut him off. I am staying right here. I can shoot. Cole, you taught me. He looked at her. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. He saw the woman who had ridden into town to find the truth, the woman who had kissed his scars. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. I'm sorry, he whispered. I am sorry I brought this to your door. You deserved a peaceful life. I chose this life, she said. I chose you. He put the rifle down and pulled her into his arms. They sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, wrapped in each other. The threat of death stripped away the last of the awkwardness. There was no room left for shame. I love you, Cole said. The words came out rough, rusty from disuse, but fierce. I never thought I would say that to anyone. I thought that part of me was dead. It is not dead, Anna said, stroking his hair. It was just waiting. He buried his face in her neck. I don't deserve you, he murmured. I am a ruin. You are my husband, she said. And you are going to live through this. We are going to live through this. He kissed her then. It wasn't the hesitant kiss of the winter, or the desperate kiss of the storm. It was a kiss of absolute claim. His mouth was hot, demanding. His hands moved over her, pulling her closer as if he could merge their bodies into one. In the dark, with the wind howling and the riders waiting on the ridge, Cole Maddox finally let go of the fear. He didn't take off the shirt. There was no time, and the armor was needed for the fight. But he gave her everything else. He whispered things into her ear that made her blush and weep at the same time. He told her she was his light, his anchor, his reason. Anna held him, her fingers tracing the line of his spine through the cloth. She felt the tension in him, the readiness for violence, but beneath it, she felt the man. "Whatever comes when the sun rises," she whispered, "you are not alone. You will never be alone again." Cole squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding ring he had placed there with such fear months ago. They waited in the dark, breathing together, while the world outside prepared to burn them down. The dawn did not break so much as it bled into the valley. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, fading into a hard, pale steel gray as the sun dragged itself over the eastern peaks. The air was heavy with the smell of ozone and wet sagebrush, the scent of a storm that was holding its breath. Inside the cabin, Cole and Anna had not slept. They sat against the wall, his arm around her, the rifle resting across his thighs. When the sound came, it was not the stealthy approach of thieves in the night. It was the bold, thundering arrival of men who believed they owned the day. Hooves pounded the muddy earth, splashing through the puddles left by the rain. Leather creaked, bits jingled. Cole stood up. He moved with the stiffness of a man who had been coiled too tight for too long. He checked the action of his Winchester one last time. "Stay here," he said. His voice was low, devoid of the panic that had gripped him days before. "I am coming out," Anna said. Cole turned to her. His eyes were shadowed, frantic. "Anna, please, if shooting starts, I will be the one reloading your gun," she said. She picked up the heavy Colt revolver from the table. "I am not hiding in the cellar. Cole, not today." He looked at her, seeing the iron in her spine that matched his own. He nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion. "Keep behind me," he said. He unbarred the door and stepped out onto the porch. There were 6 of them. Briggs sat on a massive chestnut gelding in the center, flanked by 5 men who looked as hard and worn as saddle leather. They were hired guns, drifters with cold eyes and hands that hovered near their hips. The yard was a quagmire of mud. The horses danced nervously, sensing the tension. "Morning. Maddox," Briggs called out. He wore a yellow slicker against the damp, his face flushed with the kind of courage that comes from a bottle in a posse. "Get off my land." "Briggs," Cole said. His voice carried across the yard, flat and dangerous. "Your land?" Briggs laughed, looking at his men. "Did you hear that, boys? The outlaw thinks he owns land." He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the mud. "This is honest land, Maddox. It belongs to decent men, not to cattle thieves who rode with the red sash." "I bought this deed with gold," Cole said. "It is filed in the county seat." "Stolen gold!" Briggs shouted, his face twisting with sudden venom. "Blood money! We know where you got it. You and your friends robbed the Union Pacific. You killed good men. And those cattle in your pasture? I reckon they are mavericks you rustled from my range, just like you used to rustle for Silas. It was a lie, and they both knew it." Cole's herd was small, branded with his own mark, raised from calves he had bought legally. But the truth did not matter to a mob. Cole stood his ground, the rifle held loose in his hands. He wore his heavy duster, buttoned to the chin, his gloves on. He looked like a monolith, impenetrable and cold. But Anna, standing in the doorway behind him, could see the tremor in his left hand. The shame was burning him alive. "We are taking the herd," Briggs announced. "Call it restitution for the crimes you got away with. And you are going to clear out. If I see you in this valley by sundown, I will hang you from the same tree they should have finished the job on 20 years ago." The men behind him chuckled. One of them, a man with a broken nose, unhooked the thong over his pistol hammer. Cole's jaw tightened. "You will not touch the herd, and you will not touch this house," Briggs sneered. "Look at him, wrapped up like a mummy. What is the matter? Untouchable? Afraid we will see the proof? Why don't you take off that coat? Why don't you show us the brand that proves you are nothing but a piece of property?" The insult landed like a stone. Cole flinched, his posture shrinking slightly. Anna stepped past him. She moved so quickly that Cole could not stop her. She walked to the edge of the porch, the heavy revolver held at her side, her chin high. The wind caught her skirt, snapping the fabric around her legs. "He will not show you," she said, her voice clear and ringing in the morning air, "because it is none of your business." Briggs blinked, surprised by her appearance. "Well now, the little woman speaks." "You call him a thief," Anna said, her voice trembling with rage but gaining strength with every word. "You call him a killer, but you know the truth. Mr. Briggs, you know he was a boy." She looked at the hired men, meeting their gazes one by one. He was 12 years old. She shouted, he was taken from a burning house after watching his parents die. He was held captive. He was tortured. She pointed a shaking finger at Briggs. "You talk about the brand? That brand was burned into a child to keep him from running away. And the lynching? A mob of grown men strung up a boy because they were too angry to care about justice." She stepped down onto the first stair, into the mud. "You are not punishing a criminal," she cried. "You are finishing the work of the outlaws who hurt him." "You are no better than Silas." Silence rang across the yard. The hired men shifted in their saddles. This was not the story Briggs had told them. They looked at Cole, standing on the porch, and saw not a menacing gunman, but a man haunted by ghosts. "Shut her up," Briggs screamed, his face turning purple. He reached for his gun. He didn't mean to shoot her. Perhaps, maybe he only meant to scare her back inside, but the movement was enough. Cole moved. He didn't raise the rifle. He threw himself forward, knocking Anna sideways, covering her body with his own as he crashed onto the porch floor. A gun cracked. A splinter of wood exploded from the porch post where Anna's head had been a second before. Then the yard erupted. Cole rolled, coming up on one knee, the Winchester barking. Crack thud. The man with the broken nose grabbed his shoulder and fell from his horse. His foot tangled in the stirrup. The horse bolted, screaming. Bullets tore into the cabin walls, punching through the chinking with dull thuds. Glass shattered as the window blew inward. "Get down," Cole roared, shoving Anna toward the door. He fired again, levering the rifle with a speed that blurred the eye. He wasn't shooting to kill. He was shooting to break the line. He hit the dirt in front of Briggs's horse, sending the animal rearing back. A bullet grazed Cole's shoulder, tearing through the heavy duster and the flesh beneath. He grunted, stumbling back, but he didn't drop the rifle. "Return fire, damn you!" Briggs screamed, struggling to control his mount. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos. A gunshot from the ridge, loud and echoing. "Hold fire!" a voice bellowed. "Hold fire in the name of the law!" Sheriff Miller galloped over the rise, followed by 3 deputies and the neighbor, Mr. Henderson, who had ridden for help at the first sign of the riders. The gunfire sputtered and died. The yard was filled with the smell of black powder and the sound of panicked horses. Briggs's men lowered their weapons, looking uneasy. Shooting a homesteader was one thing. Shooting a sheriff was a hanging offense. Miller rode into the yard, his shotgun leveled. He looked at the wounded man groaning in the mud, then at Briggs, and finally at Cole and Anna huddled on the porch. "Put them up." "Briggs," Miller said. "Sheriff!" Briggs shouted, holstering his gun but keeping his hand near it. "You are just in time. This maniac attacked us. We rode up to discuss a property dispute, and he opened fire. That is a lie." Anna screamed. She scrambled up, her hands covered in mud and Cole's blood. "He came here to steal the herd. He threatened to hang my husband. He is a wanted man," Briggs yelled, pointing at Cole. "That is Luke Halloway, the outlaw. I was doing my civic duty." Cole stood up slowly. He gripped his left arm, blood seeping through the fingers of his glove, staining the dark canvas of his coat. He looked at the sheriff. He didn't speak. The old fatalism had returned. He expected the handcuffs. He expected the rope. Sheriff Miller looked at Cole. "I have heard the stories. Briggs. But stories don't give you the right to ride on a man's land with 5 guns at dawn." "He is scum," Briggs spat. "Look at him. He won't even show his face. If you don't believe me, make him strip." The demand hung in the air, grotesque and heavy. "Make him show you the brand." Briggs sneered. "If he is an innocent victim like she says, why does he hide it? Why does he cover himself like a leper?" Briggs turned his eyes on Cole, a look of triumph twisting his features. "Show us. Untouchable. Show the law what you are. Prove you aren't the devil's property." Cole went rigid. This was the nightmare. This was the moment he had run from for 20 years. To be stripped naked in the dirt, surrounded by men who looked at him with hate, to be reduced to meat again. He couldn't breathe. The porch seemed to tilt under his feet. He gripped the rifle barrel for support. He looked at the sheriff. Miller was waiting, his face unreadable. He looked at the deputies. They were staring with morbid curiosity. Cole shook his head, a microscopic movement. "No, I can't." Then he felt a hand on his good arm. Anna was there. She was pale, her hair coming loose from its pins, her dress torn at the hem, but her eyes were steady. "You don't have to," she said softly. The words were for him alone. "You don't have to do anything for them. Cole, we can walk inside and lock the door." Cole looked at her. He saw the fierce protection in her gaze. She was ready to fight the whole world for his dignity. But if he walked inside now, the lie would stand. If he walked inside, Briggs won. If he walked inside, he would be hiding for the rest of his life. He looked at Briggs, he looked at the men, and then he looked at the open, wide horizon of the valley. He made his choice. He handed the rifle to Anna. "Cole," she whispered. "I am not doing it for them," he said, his voice raspy but audible. "I am doing it for me." He stepped forward to the edge of the porch stairs. He stood in the full light of the morning sun. Slowly, with his right hand, he unbuttoned his duster. He shrugged it off, wincing as the movement pulled at his grazed shoulder. It fell to the floor with a heavy thud. He reached for the buttons of his flannel shirt. His fingers were steady now. 1, 2, 3. The silence in the yard was absolute. Even the horses seemed to stop moving. Cole pulled the shirt tails out. He opened the shirt. Beneath it, he wore the faded cotton undershirt, stained with fresh blood from the graze. He gripped the hem of the undershirt. He closed his eyes for a second, drawing a breath that rattled in his chest. Then he pulled it up and over his head. He stood bare-chested in the cold wind. A gasp rippled through the crowd. One of the deputies turned away, looking sick. Cole's torso was a map of agony. The thick, twisted ridges of the whip scars crossed his chest and stomach like white ropes. The skin was puckered and pulled tight, and there, over his left pectoral, was the brand. The crude circle and cross, burned deep into the muscle, a mark of ownership that time had not faded. But it was his neck that drew the sheriff's eye, the silvery, distinct line of the rope burn, the mark of a noose that had failed to kill. Briggs laughed nervously. "See, I told you, marked. He is branded stock. Shut up, Briggs," Sheriff Miller said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. Miller dismounted and walked to the edge of the porch. He looked up at Cole. He looked at the rope scar. He looked at the chaotic, jagged nature of the whip marks. "I was a soldier in the war," Miller said. "I have seen men whipped for desertion. I have seen men branded for theft." He paused, looking Cole in the eye. "But I have never seen a man tortured like this unless he was a prisoner of war." He turned to Briggs. "That is not a criminal's brand. Briggs, and those whip marks are on his chest, not his back. He was tied down." Miller looked back at Cole, and for the first time, there was respect in his eyes. "The woman is right, isn't she?" Miller asked. "You were the boy they took." Cole nodded. His throat was too tight to speak. One of Briggs's hired men, the youngest of them, suddenly threw his gun into the mud. "I am out," he said, his voice shaking. "I didn't sign on for this. You said he was a killer. Briggs, you didn't say he was that." The boy pointed at Cole's chest. "That ain't right. No man does that to a boy." Briggs wheeled his horse around. "You are all cowards. I am taking this land. It is open range." "You are taking a ride to the county jail," Miller said, leveling his shotgun. "Get down. Briggs, now." Briggs hesitated, his hand twitching toward his gun, but he looked at the deputies, at his own men who were backing away, and finally at Cole, standing silent and exposed on the porch. He swore violently and swung down from his saddle. The deputies moved in, cuffing Briggs and the man with the broken nose. The other hired hands sat with their hands raised, eager to distance themselves from the crime. It took 20 minutes to sort it out. Statements were taken. The truth, finally, was written down in a notebook instead of whispered in a saloon. When the sheriff mounted up to lead the prisoners away, he tipped his hat to Anna. "Mrs. Maddox," he said. He looked at Cole. Cole had not moved. He was still standing there, shirtless, the wind biting at his skin, the blood drying on his shoulder. He felt lightheaded, dizzy with the adrenaline crash. He felt raw, as if his skin had been peeled away. "Mr. Maddox," the sheriff said, "if you need help with the fence, let me know." He turned the posse and rode out. The yard was empty. The silence returned. But it was different now. It was clean. Cole swayed. He braced his hand against the porch post. The shame was still there, lurking in the corners of his mind, telling him he was hideous, telling him they had all stared at his ruin. Then Anna was there. She stepped in front of him. She didn't pick up his shirt to cover him. She didn't try to hide him. She reached out and laid her hand flat against his chest, covering the brand with her warm palm. She looked him in the eyes, ignoring the scars, ignoring the blood. "Cole," she said. He looked down at her. He saw his own reflection in her eyes, and he didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man. "Come inside," she said gently. "Let me tend to you." She took his hand and led him back into the cabin. Inside, the air was warm. The stove was still radiating heat. Anna pushed him gently down onto the chair. She fetched the basin and a clean cloth. She poured water from the kettle. She washed the graze on his shoulder first. It was shallow, painful but not dangerous. She cleaned it with steady hands, her touch firm and assured. Then she washed the rest of him. She wiped the sweat and dust from his chest. She ran the cloth over the whip scars. She washed the brand. Cole sat with his head bowed, his eyes closed. He waited for the flinch. He waited for the moment she would pull away in disgust, but she didn't. She touched him with a reverence that bordered on worship. Her fingers traced the lines of his pain, not to inspect the damage, but to acknowledge the history. She was reclaiming his body, inch by inch, turning the sites of his torture into sites of her care. She dried him with a soft towel. Then she bandaged the shoulder. When she was done, she didn't step back. She stood between his knees, her hands resting on his bare shoulders. She leaned down and kissed him. It was a slow, deep kiss. Cole let out a shuddering breath and wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face in her stomach. He held on to her as if she were the only solid thing in a spinning world. "Anna?" he whispered. "Thank you." She stroked his hair. "I am here, Cole. I am always here." The final wall came down, not with a crash, but with a whisper. That night, the cabin was dim, lit only by the flickering orange glow of the stove door. The storm had passed, leaving the air outside crisp and clean. Cole stood by the bed. He was fully undressed. He did not rush to hide under the covers. He stood there, letting the firelight play over his skin, letting Anna see him, all of him. He was scarred. He was imperfect, but he was strong. Anna stood before him. She slipped her nightgown off her shoulders and let it fall. She stood naked with him, her own pale skin glowing in the low light, her scar visible on her shoulder. They looked at each other. There was no shame left in the room. There was only the quiet, profound relief of two people who have nothing left to hide. Cole reached out and touched her face. His hand was steady. "You are beautiful," he said. He pulled her to him. Skin met skin, warm and living. The contact was electric, shocking in its intensity after so long. They moved together slowly, sinking onto the bed. There was no frantic desperation this time. There was only a slow, aching exploration. Cole kissed her as if he had all the time in the world. He touched her with wonder. And when they finally joined, it was an act of absolute trust, a reclaiming of the body, a declaration that the past could no longer touch them here. 3 days later, The sun was bright and hard on the valley floor. Cole and Anna stood on the porch. Cole wore a clean shirt, open at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He didn't wear the duster. He didn't wear the gloves. His arm was around Anna's shoulders, pulling her close against his side. They looked out at the land. The fence line needed repair. The garden needed weeding. The herd needed to be moved to the upper pasture. It was a hard life. The winter would come again. The drought would come. There would be people in town who still whispered, people who would never look him in the eye. But the fear was gone. Cole looked at the horizon, then down at his wife. He smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. "We have work to do," he said. Anna leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him through the cotton shirt. "Yes," she said, "we do." They stepped off the porch together, walking out into the open air. Two wounded people who had healed each other, ready to build a life in a land that never guaranteed survival, but had finally granted them peace. Thank you for listening to the story of Cole and Anna. It has been a journey through the dust and the snow, exploring how love can heal even the deepest scars. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I am always amazed to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to From Wild West so you never miss an adventure. Share your thoughts in English in the comments. Did Cole's choice to reveal his past resonate with you? Until the next time we'd ride the trail together,